Hello and welcome to the presentation on using Freezerworks for effective tissue microarray management. My name is Rick Michaels. I'm the Vice President for Marketing and Customer Relations here at DataWorks Development. And we're going to give you an example of how to deal with a tissue microarray data link challenge. And that is how do you link your tissue microarray with the original samples. Here's an example of a young man who says there's usually a better way of doing this. Instead of using Excel, let's go ahead and plug these numbers into Freezerworks, and then we can play until lunch. Quickly, what is a tissue microarray? And here's a nice graphic to explain what our challenge is. We've got some tissue blocks here on the left side of this picture, and here each one of these tissue blocks represents a donor and his tissue sample. What we want to do is take a piece of each one of these tissue samples and place them into one tissue microarray block. So we'll have another tissue microarray, but instead of it being representative of one patient, it's going to be represent each one of these donors and patients, and so that we'll have a nice useful block for doing diagnosis and finding biomarkers and such. Out of many, one. Really quickly, let's just talk a little bit about Freezerworks. If you're not familiar with Freezerworks, we are a sample and specimen data management program. We will keep track of your samples in an easily searchable relational database that is very highly configurable, and you'll have up to 2,000 user-defined fields to create and store all of the data that you need to track in your biobank for your samples. We'll help you make maximum use of your cabinets or freezers, and with security, workflow ability to track in your biobank with your samples using Freezerworks. You'll have an electronic audit trail track. You can go follow the movement and so forth. You can check out and check in samples, and also we offer barcoding and data integrity checks for positive identification of all of your samples. It's important to note, even though the name of our product is Freezerworks, that we are a sample-centric, not a freezer-centric program. In other words, it's not a situation where you go to the freezer or the cabinet and then add samples to it. We're looking at the samples from a sample viewpoint. You've got a sample, and you're going to put them into locations. Now what you have are here we have an example of 3 sample records, each with a different donor and all the associated data that you need to track for these donors in your biobank. So what we have are aliquots then linked to these samples. So if a donor comes in, you may have tissue samples, slide samples, aliquots of blood, urine, plasma, whatever you store. Different aliquots for each sample. So here we have, for example, these three patients in our database. We have a tissue block for each one of these. What we can also do is not only do you have aliquots stored associated with samples, but also you have the ability to create sub-aliquots of those aliquots. And this, of course, is what we'll want to do with a tissue microarray. We've got a tissue sample here from a patient here, donor ID ABC. We want to take a piece of this and make a sub-aliquot of that aliquot. So we have the unique ID here. Down here, when we create the sub-aliquot, we'll have a parent ID that will link here. 10,001 will link to 10,001 here, keeping that link. Same thing with all these. So we're going to create sub-aliquots. To create the TMA, the first thing we want to do is search for the samples that we want to include in our TMA. So we've found this, and this, and we want to create a TMA with these samples and others as well. We select the samples using a very powerful and robust search tools available in Freezerworks. So here's an example in Freezerworks of a tissue bank entry screen here that I've created here. And here we have the sample, the information, the donor, and so forth, consent, and whatever you need to store. Down here are the aliquots, and we've got an OCT block. We have a slide, we have some plasma aliquots, and associated information, including the freezer location or the cabinet location. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull a piece from this OCT block, for example, and create a sub-aliquot of it, of that block for the TMA block. So we've got our samples selected. Next thing we want to do is select our aliquots, the aliquots from those samples that we're going to create the TMA with. And so I've got 3 here selected here of these samples. Now we're going to build our tissue microarray block using these sub-aliquots. So we have these 3 aliquots. We're going to create sub-aliquots of these using the import features of Freezerworks, and we select these then, as what we'll have is, besides these 3 samples, we'll have a 4th sample, which we'll call a TMA sample, consisting of multiple donors. So whereas each of these is 1 donor, we now have a TMA sample of all of these donors. So in Freezerworks, what you would first do is select your TMA aliquots. You'll select your samples, and then you'll select the aliquots that you want to include in that TMA. And so I've got a whole host here of a lot of different aliquots that I've selected. With the tumor type of melanoma, I'm going to have a TMA of melanoma, and here are the aliquots and the types and the locations. So I would do my selection, I'd select my aliquots, and then I would create a report, and maybe print a report and go and pull them out of my cabinets using Freezerworks to tell me exactly where they are. Get them all put together, and I'm going to create an export file of these. And the export file is something that I will then take the data information I need to take to my TMA creating machine with the software, so that I can use that information here that I've pulled out of Freezerworks to create the TMA block and have every location for every core placed in the right area. So what I'm going to next do is then create an export format that I can then take and read into whatever software I'm using for my TMA creation program. So here's an example I have. I've got the donor ID, very important, and then the aliquot, unique aliquot ID, and that's important too. So I've got the sample link, the donor ID, I've got the unique aliquot link here as well. So I build my TMA block using the Galileo system or whatever system you use, and then I'll use whatever export software that it has to create an export file of the information. So I've got a TMA ID. This is going to be very important. I'm going to create a TMA block using this ID number. So every core in the TMA will have that ID number. The donor ID for every core will be here. I've got that in there as well. Any other information I may have here, I've got the tumor type and aliquot type. The other important thing is the aliquot, unique aliquot ID that I pulled out of Freezerworks is going to be here as well. And then the location, the row and column, for example, on the TMA block here. So this is an export file that I've pulled out after I've created my core that identifies the aliquot that every single core in the TMA belongs to. This will all go into one TMA. So using this file, which will probably be a CSV file or a text file, I will create my import. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to create a TMA block sample. I'm going to add a sample here with aliquots, and I'm going to interactive auto assign aliquot positions, and what we'll have here is these unique numbers will go in and become the parent ID of every aliquot in the TMA block, so that I can trace everything back to the original sample that it came from. So my import type here, first I will add a sample with aliquots. This is going to be one sample record with many, many aliquots linked to it. And then my fields, I will tell Freezerworks what each one of these fields goes into Freezerworks. So the TMA ID will be this ID that will uniquely identify each sample. So when Freezerworks imports this, it's just going to create one sample record, but it's going to create many aliquots linked to that sample record. So I've got this order here. Now at this point of my presentation, what I'm doing here is deviating from the PowerPoint presentation I gave. For the benefit of those of you that are currently using Freezerworks, I want to walk through this TMA creation through import for you so you can see how it actually works. So here I've got a version of Freezerworks Unlimited, and let's first look at the configure freezers. And I want to show you the TMA cabinet that I'm going to create and place the TMA block into. Here it is, TMA cabinet 2. I've got 3 sections, so if you can imagine a 3-section cabinet, and it's a pretty large cabinet. I've got 100 blocks in each cabinet of this overall TMA cabinet. So I've got 3 sections. 3 sections in cabinet 2, cabinet 1A, 2A, and 3A. Each of these has 100 blocks. And each of these blocks has room for a 9 by 15 TMA core. So every core will be placed in a row and column in this block. I've labeled the aliquot core. So let me show you how this works. We'll go ahead and take a look at the view configuration picture, and so you can see it's just one long line of 100 blocks in cabinet 1A. And then every block has rows and columns like so, and here's where your cores will go. So a block will hold 1 TMA block. And this cabinet will hold 100, and the entire cabinet itself, this subdivision of the cabinet will hold 100. The entire cabinet itself will hold 3 of these, or 300. So I'm going to import into this cabinet 1A. Alright, let me go ahead and cancel out here now. And what I'll now do is let me go ahead and pull up the spreadsheet that I've created from my TMA software. And this is the core that I've built with it. I've exported the data. Now your data may look a little bit different, but the important thing is you must have the TMA ID. You must have the unique aliquot ID, which is of course we got from Freezerworks to begin with. And then the row and column where each of these cores is placed on the TMA block. Now I've already imported a TMA ID 99999. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another one. I'm going to have the same information, and you can do this. You can create multiple TMAs. I'm using the same aliquots to develop your cores. I'll just put it an 8 here. So what I'll do is I'll just call this TMA 99998, and then I'll just change all these to that. So I'm going to import now a TMA duplicate of that previous TMA. Okay, so let me just minimize this for a second. Now we'll go to the import, and we'll go to import data. And here's my import TMA import option. Samples, we're going to add a sample with aliquots, and interactive auto assign aliquot positions will allow me to immediately place that core into the position I want it in the cabinet. I have it set up here as a comma. new line return delimiter, the CSV file that I was looking at in Excel. You'll have to, if you're using an Excel spreadsheet, you'll have to change it to a CSV, which is easy to do in Excel. And then these are the fields that I'm going to match up here. So Tma ID is a sample field that I pulled out of the samples, Tma ID, and then these other ones are, I believe these are both aliquot and sample IDs. So here's my setup, and let me just show you how this is going to map out here. Okay, here we go. So Tma ID, the first column in my spreadsheet will be the Tma ID will be imported here. Donor ID, the donor of each of these cores, which is the sample field, will go into donor ID aliquot. So I have a field in my aliquot ID that matches up my donor ID, and so so this is going to be stored in a aliquot field, even though I pulled it out of a sample field, because the TMA is going to, the TMA cannot have, will have a different donor for every core. A couple other fields that may or may not be in my spreadsheet: a tumor type, aliquot type, TMA sample, melanoma, unique aliquot ID. Now this is the aliquot that was pulled out of the original core for each of these, for each core. This is unique aliquot that makes up each additional, each core in the block. But what I'm going to do here is I am going to import this into parent aliquot ID, because in this import I am creating a Tma block. Freezerworks will give each core its own unique aliquot ID, its own unique number, but I need to match it up with the previous, the parent, and so this aliquot ID actually becomes the parent aliquot ID in the Tma core. And then the row and the column are the position of each core, and it matches up in my freezer that I am importing it into. Remember, there were three subdivisions. We had the block, and then we had the row and the column. So the block's going to be the same. I just need to import the row and the column. And then since Tma ID is if this needs to be unique, because over here this is a field that will uniquely identify each sample as a Tma ID. So when Freezerworks imports this entire row here of 25 samples, it's going to look first and say, okay, is Tma ID 9999998 unique? Is there another Tma ID in Freezerworks that has the same number? If it is, it'll give me an error, it will not import. If it isn't, if this number is unique, it will import it, and then it will attach. It'll treat every one of these fields as an aliquot, these lines as an aliquot, and it will attach all these aliquots to that one Tma ID. Let's go ahead and now do the import of Tma import updated CSV again. So let's go ahead and do import. Go find it. Here it is. Double click on it. Okay. Everything so far so good. Now Freezerworks is asking me, okay, where you wanted me to auto assign positions into Freezerworks already. If you remember, I did that in import type. Which freezer and where do you want me to start? I'm going to cabinet 2, and I'm going to cabinet 1A, and I'm going to start at block 2. Block 1 is already created. I'm going to start at block 2. And so we're going to go ahead and import this block as block number 2 in cabinet 1A. So we press OK, and the import then takes place. We can watch it here. We see that we have one sample created with 24 aliquots. Let's go ahead and view the sample we created. And here it is. Here's our Tma block screen, and we've got the Tma here with all the aliquot locations here. We have the parent aliquot ID, and which is from the original block that it came from donor 1020. Remember, we put the donor ID, which was a sample field, we place it in a aliquot field as well. So donor ID is a match for aliquot and sample, and we have the unique aliquot IDs that Freezerworks assigned during this import. So during this import, we created one sample record with the Freezerworks ID of this, with the TMA ID. The tumor type was imported as well, and the information, the LH aliquot, was created using interactive auto assign. We created all 24 aliquots with the locations as the TMA export displayed for us. Let's go ahead and save and close this and take a look at that block. Go ahead and add over at View Inventory, Explore Freezers, Tma Cabinet 2. We go to Cabinet 1A. We had Block 1. Now we have Block 2. This is Block 2. And here is our TMA IDs, 99998. Here are all the locations they were on this block. We have some spaces here so that the block looks unique when we pull it out. It looks unique, and it's easier to tell where each core is. If we want, also we can look at the unique aliquot ID for each of these aliquots by selecting it here, and here it is as well. We might also want to assign an alias to this. The block 2 is also 99998. We can call it TMA ID 99998, and that's kind of a nice little handy thing to tell us, what we're looking at here. We're looking at TMA ID 99998. Anytime that we want to look at an individual core, we highlight it. We can have information here on what we've highlighted. If we want to go into the record itself, double click, and we can go into the record itself. And that's how we would import a TMA block into Freezerworks using the cores that we pulled out of the samples of the blocks we previously had in Freezerworks. If you've got digital pathology software you're using as well, for example PathXL, and you've got a location for every core, the microscope image of every core in your TMA block, you can import that as well. Now you can create a user-defined field called, here I call it TMA picture. I've got a picture of every core that's included on this TMA. So for example, when I go into my viewing screen in Freezerworks, if I want to take a look at this here, I would go ahead and click it, and this is something. This will then show up. Right now what I've got here is from PathXL, is I have have it on the cloud. I have the link on the cloud, and I can then look at the sample that of that core that I'm viewing here. So you can have linkage to your microscope image as well as to the rest of your data. So with all these links in place, I can search if I want to find a donor, a specific donor. I want to see all of the blocks and samples and aliquots I have in that donor. I can do a search. What I've done here is I'm going ahead and I'm doing a search in all fields for the donor ID 10049. So I've got all fields here selected like this. What it's done is it's pulled up all the donor IDs and the donor ID aliquots, because every time I stored a donor ID, I also stored the donor ID in the aliquot field as well. So it's pulled up 3 aliquots in my search, 2 from the original sample here, the donor ID here, 2 aliquots that belong to that original sample, and a 3rd one here that belongs to a TMA sample. And as you can see here, when I want to look at this TMA sample, I see that there is a direct link. This is the parent ID, which tells me that on this TMA sample, this parent ID is linked to this aliquot here. So if I want to, so I have a direct link to the aliquot as well as to the donor, which is the sample record. If you have any questions on this process, I went through it pretty fast, but we can certainly step through it with you. If you have Freezerworks and you want to start using TMA management using this operation, please give us a call. Sales@freezerworks.com if you're looking at Freezerworks and you don't have it right now, or if you have Freezerworks and you want help in setting up your tissue bank for this purpose, go ahead and email us at support@freezerworks.com and we'll help you set it up.